even just about Syria itself.
Convincing governments that when refugees knock at their doors, or when people knock at their doors and ask for asylum, that those requests for asylum have to be examined in fairness and have to be dealt with according to principles. Anybody who asks for asylum has to demonstrate that he or she is fleeing for certain very specific reasons. There is a process to get to that truth. We're asking government to follow that process. That's very important. But if I may say, we're also focusing on the opposite end, at the beginning of the flow. We need more investment in peace, as I said. We need also more investment in countries that host large numbers of refugees. Refugees are not a problem of the rich world. They're a problem mostly of poor countries. 80 to 90% of refugees and displaced are not in the wealthy part of the world, but in low-income and middle-income countries.
That is a great point, particularly about Syria issue. If you look at Jordan and Lebanon, those are the countries that are really suffering, and they are lack of resources.
In Lebanon, 1 in 4 people is a refugee. And it is the lessons that we have learned with Syrian refugees when assistance declined and they started moving on towards Europe that have generated new ideas on how to deal with refugee problems. You know, traditionally we have responded with humanitarian means. They are important, medicines, food, blankets, but there's more that is needed. You know, we have realized, for example, that a whole generation of Syrian children have not had access to education because they've been in exile 6-7 years. So we have now convinced development actors like the World Bank, like big bilateral institutions to invest in education or in the creation of jobs. And we have also convinced donors that it is important to support not only refugees, but the host communities, the national communities in Jordan and Lebanon, but in many African countries as well, that host refugees. If you don't do that, you don't create an environment that is positive, and you create hostility towards refugees, which is very dangerous.
The measure it seems that everybody's taken so far is partly, at least, close the door, rather than open the door to welcome the refugees. So how can you convince governments, particularly now?
We must recognize that the issue is complicated. The people arriving have arrived in large numbers. They are refugees, but also people that are not refugees, often mixed together. There's a powerful ring of smuggling networks that exploit the refugees. So the challenges are many, but these challenges require unity on the part of European Union members, and unfortunately we have not seen that unity yet.
You yourself was stationed in Afghanistan for about 4 years. You know exactly what is going on there. What do you make of this long extension of work that you have to focus on, even about one country, about one war?
Refugee crisis can happen in a matter of hours. Huge movements. In 1979, millions of Afghans fled Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion. And now, almost 40 years later, we still don't have a solution because, much as crises are fast, solutions are slow. Why? Because solutions depend on peacemaking and peace building, and both are slow processes. But I can tell you, based on my experience in Afghanistan, I was there in 2001 after the fall of the Taliban, 2002 and 2003. That very initial period after the fall of the Taliban was a period of extraordinary opportunity. Millions of people decided to go back to Afghanistan because they wanted to participate in the reconstruction of the country. It was our inability collectively to sustain that hope that caused the subsequent problems.
Did you regret that? I mean, not you personally, but rather the international community's inability to do it.
I do, and perhaps we were not convincing enough on the need to invest more resources in peace building. That was the crucial time when it was possible to turn Afghanistan in a success story.
If thinking about it today, what can be done better?
I think that mistakes or gaps, let's put it that way, occurred in the subsequent phase. And remember, in 2003, another war started in Iraq. And that was not a war endorsed by the
international
United
community.
Nations and the international community. And among other problems, that war interrupted somehow the reconstruction of Afghanistan, distracted resources from it. I would say that the most crucial phase in rebuilding states is the phase that follows peacemaking, what we would call the peace building phase.
Yes.
I don't think we've got it right yet in the international community. We need to really be more fast, more effective, more focused in where we invest resources in order to secure the benefits of peace and to make it sustainable in the long run. It's a very difficult challenge.
Certainly a very difficult challenge as regional conflicts have escalated and unprecedented. 65.3 million people around the world have been forced from their homes. Thus, the funding for the relocation and settlement of the refugees have become an immense challenge for the UNHCR. In my discussion with Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner of the UN Refugee Agency, he explains how he acquires financial resources from government and also big players to find refugees a new home. Funding is a big issue. How to encourage them to contribute so that you do your work?
More than 90% of the funding is from voluntary sources, mostly from governments, donor governments. Well, we have to convince them that supporting refugees and displaced people is an important humanitarian imperative, but it is also in their interest, because the more you support refugees, the more you meet their needs and, if I may say, give them opportunities, the more you ensure that they're not a threat to overall stability and security. What we want now is the involvement of bigger actors that bring additional resources.
Who are the bigger actors to you?
The World Bank is a very good example. Actually, the World Bank has understood that forced displacement is a global challenge like pandemics, like climate change, and therefore needs dedicated resources to be addressed. We are currently helping the World Bank program resources up to $2 billion in 10 countries in Africa and Asia to address refugee situations. This is the first time in history that we do it at this scale, and I hope that other large development actors will follow suit.
The used to be held high moral standards seem to be threatened by the rise of xenophobia in the world and the fact that some countries tend to look more inward rather than being more international. So what you're asking, Mr. High Commissioner, might not be possible.
Seen from my perspective, I'm promoting solidarity with refugees. This goes exactly in the opposite direction. But we see also a lot of solidarity and openness. And look at the results of recent European election. They are not all going in one direction. I think that there is still a sense that we have to keep open, we have to keep societies open, because this is the nature of future societies, to be open societies. But we have to address many of the concerns, of the real concerns of the people in terms of the economy, in terms of security, in terms of identity and values. The concerns of people in Europe, in America, and in other places regarding these areas are very real. We cannot ignore them as maybe we have done in the past. We have to address that in the right manner, in a mature manner, but we also have to pass the message of openness.
Behind closed doors, how are you convincing them?
One of the most important things to be done, is to invest more to try and solve the root causes of these forced population movements. First, stop the wars, and that also requires unity on the part of the international community. And second, address problems that compound those created by wars, poverty and climate change in particular.
Mr. High Commissioner, of course there are new phenomena of solutions as well. How are you going to make the best use of these tools in the box is a big and interesting question.
For me, the visit that I'm currently paying to China is very interesting because the spirit and the substance of the Belt and Road Initiative, you can easily overlap it with other initiatives that are important for UNHCR and its work. I'm thinking of what transpired, what emerged from last year's New York summit on refugees and migrants, the follow-up of which is very much a responsibility of my organization in terms of creating a global compact for refugees, but also the Sustainable Development Goals, which is really the driving direction for the whole United Nations systems until 2030. We are all moving in that direction from different perspectives, from different angles, and I am very impressed by the achievements of China around the Belt and Road Initiative. And my message here to my Chinese interlocutor has been that working for refugees, inserting a refugee dimension in that initiative is a very natural act. It falls very naturally in that broader initiative, and I think that we're already identifying many projects, many activities that we can carry out in partnership with China in that context.
Your predecessor, Mr. Secretary General now, Mr. Guterres, has been one of the longest working High Commissioner for UNHCR. Now you're sitting in this position, facing even a bigger crisis as we speak. I don't know how you go to sleep at night. It seems there's a lot of work to do.
Yes, but these are very important challenges they go beyond the refugee question. They really are challenges that belong to our core values as human beings. Solidarity with those that flee war and persecution is a shared value in all cultures and in all traditions. And somehow, by doing this work, we also uphold a very important tradition that I think motivates all of us that work in this area to carry out our work in spite of the difficulties. In fact, the fact that my predecessor did this work for 10 years and now is called to face even greater challenges is a good motivation for me. He built a very good organization, so I'm very lucky to have inherited a strong organization, and my challenge is to continue to respond to those crises with the same determination, with new ideas, and I know with the cooperation of the Secretary General.
My final question for you, Mr. High Commissioner, I see the passion you have for your work, but at the end of the day, you are the first responder, you're also the last resort. What do you make of that role?
I make of that role especially one thing, that it is true that many times we are the last resort. So we have to give refugees whatever they need urgently, but also being the last resort means that we have to be the one finding solutions for them. You know, my mandate as High Commissioner for Refugees is made of two things. Ensuring the protection of refugees wherever they are, and helping governments find solutions for them. This is often a less well-known part of UNHCR's responsibility, but I think it is a very important one. And sometimes you have to be creative to find those solutions for refugees, be it returning home or being resettled to third countries or being integrated where they are. But we need to find ways, because often those solutions are not just round the corner, are not just evident. They require negotiation, they require convincing. And this is being the last resort for them. It's the last resort that opens up the door for a future and for hope.